And let's bring you an update from the situation in Burkina Faso. A lieutenant colonel appointed to oversee security in Burkina Faso's capital has emerged as the leader of the military coup that overthrew President Roch Kabore after heavy gunfights in Ouagadougou. Paul-Henri Damiba was presented as the president of the Patriotic Movement for Safeguard and Restoration, which seized power on Monday. We have details in this report.
Media reports say President Kabore was detained at a military camp by soldiers. The soldiers also allegedly surrounded the state television headquarters. Troops leading the uprising say his government failed to support them during the country's years-long conflict with armed groups. Some troops in the West African nation have demanded the sacking of military chiefs and more resources to fight militants. Heavy gunfire was also heard near President Kabore's residence in the capital on Sunday. Monday morning, several armored vehicles from the presidential fleet riddled with bullets could be seen near the residence. One was spattered with blood. A government source says talks between representatives of the soldiers and Burkina Faso's defense minister failed to make a headway. The West African regional bloc known as ECOWAS, which already has suspended Mali and Guinea in the past 18 months over military takeovers, condemned what it called an attempted coup in Burkina Faso and says it holds the military responsible for the physical well-being of President Kabore. President Kabore has led Burkina Faso since being elected in 2015. He was re-elected in November 2020 for another 5-year term, but frustration has been growing at his inability to stem the spread of violence across the country. Attacks linked to Al-Qaeda and the armed groups ISIL are escalating, killing thousands and displacing more than an estimated 1.5 million people.
An African Affairs analyst, Ibrahim Anoba, joins me now for more on this. He joins me virtually from the U.S. Good to have you join us, Ibrahim.
Nice to be here.
So once again, we're discussing a coup in Africa. The last time we spoke, I think we also spoke about a coup in Africa. And we're back here. But yesterday, as of yesterday, the military had not taken or had not stated that it seized power, which was earlier on in the day, but later in the evening, the statement was made saying they had seized power in Burkina Faso. How are you reading this situation in Burkina Faso?
Well, thanks for having me, Precious. First of all, this is quite an unfortunate development in a country that has witnessed close to a dozen military coups since its independence in 1966, both successful and unsuccessful, and since its independence in the 1960s. But again, it's not only a product of Kabore's failure to address many of the challenges in Burkina Faso, particularly that related to the underwhelming equipment provided for the military to fight jihadist insurgents, but also more about the new trends in the West Africa region, where people are pretty much the military personnel are quite fed up with the head of state's attitude towards insecurity challenges in which these military boys are actually asked to go face. So it's more of one failure on the Kabore side, but also an example of the ongoing trend across West Africa.
And one of the reasons cited for what is playing out now in Burkina Faso is the issue of security. They say that the former President Kabore did not take responsibility for the welfare of the police, for example. They talked about food rationing for soldiers. But there is also a security crisis in that country, as with most West African countries. Does this sort of play into the hands of the armed gangs, or is it a plus for Burkina Faso that the military is now in charge when you look at security in that country?
Certainly does, because remember, the goal of the jihadist group, which of course is linked to ISIS and Al-Qaeda, is to destabilize Burkina Faso to the extent that it wouldn't have a democratically elected government. And with the military coming into power, that's one of the aims of this military jihadist insurgents coming into reality. But it's not only about that. We also have to see things from the point of the military. If you remember last November, some of Burkina-based military men were fighting insurgents in the northern region of Inata, and they are pretty much overrun by these same insurgents. And about 50 of those military personnel were brutally killed. But not only because they were killed, but primarily because they were ill-equipped. And as you said, they went 2 weeks without proper nutrition. So if they join the army to save their people, and they know that their people are not safe back home, but also that they themselves are not equally safe in the front line, and the president is pretty much not doing anything significant beyond just firing military generals, then you have to really question what Kabore's intent or appetite was as regards his fight against insurgents. Again, he was at some point the Minister of Defense, so the stakes were high for him coming into office in 2015. But as he has since failed to be efficient in his management of the security challenges in Burkina Faso.
And you can hardly talk about this coups without mentioning France. For example, in Mali, there is now sort of the relations between France and Mali has been strained, and it looks like Mali is now looking to Russia. Do you think that in terms of its influence in the region, France, with its allies like Guinea, Mali, and Burkina Faso, that France still has some level of influence, or this has far-reaching ramifications for the influence of France?
I think it's the latter. It has great ramifications for France. Remember, France doesn't even have a good record in these countries right from the days of colonization. And of course, countries these days, particularly the military leaders, are actually looking beyond France, looking at options like Russia and some other parts of Europe and the Middle East for assistance in helping them with their insurgent crisis. Because they said, France has not been able to efficiently help them manage this insurgent crisis for the last how many years now. So not only that, France is to blame for many of these coups, because these are leaders which at some point is supported to come into power. And of course, it will huge influence on what those leaders does in their countries, but also because France's military presence in West Africa, particularly in the French-speaking countries of West Africa, may be dwindling as military leaders in Guinea, Mali, and now in Burkina Faso look at other options beyond France.
And let's talk about ECOWAS, because ECOWAS has released a statement, as it always would. And part of that statement says that it wants to see a rapid change in the situation in Burkina Faso. ECOWAS made similar statements in Guinea, made similar statements in Mali, and now the junta has increased the stay in power for another 5 years. Do you think that ECOWAS has the credibility to make statements that sticks? Because a lot of people in Africa think that, or West Africa, especially for the population, people think that ECOWAS is just a president's club where they look after themselves and not necessarily the people.
Sadly, ECOWAS is as toothless as the African Union. They only, promote the interest of their colleagues, not necessarily the state interest of the country or the member states. And of course, we do not see anything beyond criticism or condemnations whenever these kind of things happen. But the question you want to ask is, what was ECOWAS doing before this problem degenerated into a military coup in Sudan, in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Guinea? In fact, the African Union has to blame as well. So the question here is, why would they not bring their colleagues to book? Why would they not condemn their colleagues when they are actually persecuting people? Just last week, Kabore was violently cracking down on protesters, asking for better security. Why didn't ECOWAS come up then and question Kabore's strategy? Why didn't they sanction him? So why now are they actually condemning the military personnel in the country? Is because they do not have a strategy to provide support before such situation degenerates into coup, and this has to change.
And rightly, military coups should not be tolerated in any society. It is not a solution. Africa should stick to democracy. We're in a democracy, and we should at least find our way within our democracy and ensure that it works. But poor leadership should also be criticized. Do you think that ECOWAS needs to start doing more in terms of that? There are security challenges within the region. Do you think that there needs to be more collaboration? Some countries are also facing economic crisis. Do you think that there needs to be more collaboration as well in that regard?
You're right, Precious, but I think perhaps one way we need to actually start this conversation in ECOWAS is to actually define what constitutes democracy, what constitutes legitimacy. So if you have a leader who corrupts his way into power, that is, rig elections and emerge as the president of a country, do you consider that legitimate or democratically right? Or do you say when majority of a country actually accept a military coup to topple such leader, then that is illegitimate or undemocratic? I think these ideas that we borrow from the West and impose on our African situations are in fact, to a large extent, the basis of our problem. So perhaps the one way ECOWAS can help in this situation is to redefine the way it engages with these leaders, what it considers appropriate attitudes and actions in terms of policy. Do you condemn a leader when they go overboard by criminalizing basic actions or kidnapping and killing their own people? Do you condemn the same leader when they pursue policies that are antisocial? I think these are questions that ECOWAS needs to ask before it can go into any deeper conversation on how to help its African member states.
Burkina Faso is now under military rule, as with Mali, as with Guinea. How do you see things playing out for Burkina Faso? Like you rightly noted, we saw the protests on the streets, citizens who support the military takeover, which is the same situation we saw in Mali, unlike what we're seeing in places like Sudan and Guinea. But how do you think things will play out in terms of political stability and security in Burkina Faso in the coming months?
See, it just seemes as though African leaders do not learn, Precious. When this first happened in 1966 to the first president of Burkina Faso, the then upper voter, President Mauricio Miogo, it was the same situation. People were protesting its draconian austerity measures. In response, he clamped down against labor union activists, and the military intervened. And of course, the people went into a frenzy by appreciating what the military did. The same thing is happening here with Kabore, where he failed to manage protest and instead clamped down on them, and the military intervened again. So Burkina Faso hasn't really learned from its own past, and I guess this is one unbecoming of African leaders, where they just disregard what had happened in the past and think since they have the proximity to power and the support of the ECOWAS, they can actually utilize power to whatever extent they wish, when in fact they are forgetting that the people will eventually hold the ultimate authority over their positions. And I've seen in Burkina Faso, the military will always respond to the people's will, even if we think these are military's own selfish will.
Always great to have these conversations with you, African Affairs Analyst Ibrahim Anoba.
Anytime.